And welcome back, folks, to WrestleRant, where every single Tuesday I, Graham GSM Matthews, break down all the pay-per-views that I watch on the WWE Network. Last week we kicked off our WCW pay-per-view review series with WCW Starrcade 1983. If you haven't already checked it out, please do so. Today we kick off our ECW reviews with Hardcore Heaven 1995. So, from what I gather, this was not a pay-per-view. It took place on, I think, July 1st, 1995 at the ECW Arena. From what I understand, their first official pay-per-view was Barely Legal 97, which I have seen before. I watched it in full. I reviewed it for nextdaywrestling.net in written form. I'm going to watch it back before I review it again for WrestleRant in a few months. Yeah, it's going to be a while. So I'll talk about the lineup in a second. But I believe Hardcore Heaven was one of the first really big shows. And they uploaded it to the WWE Network, not when it launched in early 2014, but either in late 2014 or late 2015, when they had the whole ECW Exposed theme on the WWE Network, where they uploaded a bunch of old, never before seen on the WWE Network ECW footage, including Hardcore Heaven 1995. So I figured I would review it, even though it's not a typical pay-per-view, but it is under the pay-per-view section for ECW on the WWE Network. And I've always really said I'm not that much of an ECW guy. There were a few things in the show that I liked. By and large, wasn't that good of a show, but to each their own. I will talk about it nonetheless. So the opening match, Dudley Dudley and Snot Dudley taking on the Pitbulls in a tag team match. Fine for what it was, maybe not the most electric match to kick off the show. Didn't last too long, but it really wasn't much of a match. It was more of a storyline progression than anything else. So during the match, and the focus was on anything but the match. So that, like I said, it was fine for what it was, but I really can't say much more than that about it because it was more about what was going on at ringside as opposed to what was going on in the ring. So you had Raven and Stevie Richards. They were with the Pitbulls. They had an alliance. They were at ringside with them, helping, cheering them on against the Dudleys. But in the middle of the match, Stevie Richards starts making out with Francine. So Beulah comes out, Beulah McGillicuddy. She comes out after Francine makes out with Stevie to break it up, and they catfight. And then Raven drags both Beulah and Stevie to the back, and that allows the Pitbulls to lose the matchup, get distracted. The Dudleys scored the victory, and the Pitbulls went off on Raven and Richards after the match in a post-match promo. So again, not a great match. It got what it needed to get done, which is admirable, but beyond that, it wasn't the most memorable match I've ever seen at all. Another tag team match after that, we had Dino Sendoff and Don E. Allen taking on Chad Austin and Broad Street Bully in a match that went maybe all of a minute or two before it was interrupted by Paul E. Dangerously, who called out 911, who laid waste to everyone in the ring, and the crowd loved 911. They loved the attack, got him over as a dominant force, so that was cool, but the match was completely insignificant. After that, we had Hack Myers taking on Big Mally in a 6-minute match, which was probably 5 minutes and 59 seconds longer than it needed to be. Not great at all. This fucking sucked. Two huge big men that could do nothing but punch each other. They did nothing for the first 2 minutes, 3 minutes of the match probably. Just standing around looking at each other. No one gave a shit. This was pretty dreadful. So Mally was just showered with shit chants. Every single time he went to go punch Hack Myers, he was showered with shit. Every single time he went for a punch. So he obviously was not too beloved by the crowd. He was pretty terrible. He dominated the majority of the match. He missed an elbow. Myers, he rolled him up or just laid on top of him for the win. So, again, terrible match. That was fucking embarrassing. A pretty good match up next with Taz and Too Cold Scorpio. Scorpio was the heel, which was weird. So he's got a lot of crowd-pleasing offense. He actually hit one of his signature maneuvers. I don't know what you would call it. It looked like a moonsault leg drop. I know there's a name for it. I'm not exactly sure what it's called. I think it was his finisher in WWE. It wasn't the shooting star press or the 450. It was a combination of that with a leg drop at the end. But anyway, so you take all that away, not that great of a match. I think he was kind of miscast as a heel in the ECW because this really was not his best work. They got some time, though, about 10 minutes. So Taz won initially. After Scorpio's foot was on the rope, though, they restarted the match. Bill Alfonso restarted the match. Paul E. Dangerously came out, who is, of course, Paul Heyman. He came out, threatened to fire Bill Alfonso in the midst of all the controversy. Too Cold Scorpio laid out Taz with a chair shot to score the victory. So afterward, we had a promo. We had Joey Styles interviewing Shane Douglas in the ring, and Shane Douglas admitted he was in negotiations with Vince McMahon and the then WWF to jump ship from ECW to go to their company, which he did, by the way, and I'll get more to that in a little bit in terms of what happened after the show with Shane Douglas. So Woman comes out, of course, later known as Nancy Benoit, the real-life wife of Chris Benoit. She comes out and says, hey, why don't you join me and Sandman and reconsider staying with ECW? He says, fuck that, you're a trash bag hoe, or something like that. And Sandman comes out to her aid, and then Cactus Jack came out to brawl or fend off Sandman to lead to their title match later on in the night. So that was that. Promo went on for way too long. At least the guy's a great mic worker. He's a great talker, so it wasn't that terrible. But on a show that should have been about all action, should have been all about the action, that was kind of dragged on for longer than it should have. After that, for the ECW Tag Team titles, we had Raven and Stevie Richards, the aforementioned duo of Raven and Richards, taking on Tommy Dreamer and Luna Vachon. So yes, we had intergender tag team action in this matchup. A fine match. It was actually probably one of, if not the best match in the entire show. They didn't get a ton of time, but I thought they worked well together. Good spots. Luna Vachon did not feel out of place whatsoever. She is a legitimate badass. She did not feel like she wasn't on the same level as Dreamer or Richards or Raven. So anyway, so Beulah comes out. She emerges once again and costs Luna the match by throwing something in her eyes, like dust or sand or whatever. She throws something in Luna's eyes, and that allows Stevie to pick up the victory, win the match, and retain their ECW Tag Team titles. After that, we had Axel Rotten taking on Ian Rotten in a Teapai, I don't know how you pronounce that, death match. This was not that good. So basically the rules of the match were that both both Axel and Ian, had to have their fist taped with shards of glass and then basically punch each other with them. That was really stupid. I'm sorry. I know ECW had a lot of great moments, but this was just taking it a step too far. And the issue was that it wasn't even entertaining. It fucking sucked. This was not good at all. Not that good of a match whatsoever. The stipulation was just was not necessary. It was way too much gore for a match that wasn't even that good. And then in the end, Axel went over. So again, kind of a dumb match. For the ECW Championship, the Sandman taking on Cactus Jack. Not that good of a match considering who was involved. It probably should have been better. The Sandman has never been known to be the greatest wrestler in the world, but Cactus Jack, I mean, come on, this should have been a lot better than what it was. They had fucking barbed wire, they had Singapore canes, like, it was a pretty hardcore match, but the crowd really was not all that into it, surprisingly. They had a ref bump, which was completely unnecessary, because it was a fucking Extreme Rules match anyway, as was every other match in ECW, so why they did the ref bump, I have no idea. Anyway, so Shane Douglas comes in, he attacks Sandman, before then also attacking Cactus Jack, and putting Sandman on top of Cactus Jack, allowing him to retain the ECW title. Why he turned on both men, as opposed to just one, who knows, who cares. So, Douglas comes out, and forces Todd Gordon, the then commissioner, to get on his knees in front of him and beg him to stay with ECW. Todd Gordon says instead, you know, fuck it, dude, you're fired. Who cares? I'm not going to beg for you to stay with ECW. You're fired. And then Shane Douglas goes off. He attacks Todd Gordon. He punches him. That allows security to come out. That leads to security coming out and trying to hold back Shane Douglas. So 911 makes the save, lays out Shane Douglas, and sends him back into WWF, where he had a very lackluster run as Dean Douglas. And I talked a lot about Dean Douglas on the In Your House pay-per-views in late 95, early 96. It was not the greatest run whatsoever for Shane Douglas in WWF. Anyway, we get to the main event. Public Enemy taking on the Gangstas, two feuding tag teams with a lot of bad blood between them. So this was a good match. They played off that bad blood well. A lot of good spots. Jumping off the top of the scaffold or whatever the fuck it was called. On top of I don't know who did it, but it was a cool spot. And this was a perfect example of an ECW match where they didn't go too far with the shards of glass in their face. It was bloody. It was brutal, but it wasn't too over the top, which I know is what ECW was known for. I'm not as big of a fan of that style. This was a hardcore match, a true hardcore match, without going too far unnecessarily. and it paid off. It was a really good match. Easily the best thing in the entire show. Public Enemy went over, celebrating with a crowd to close out the show. And the whole crowd's in the room. When I say celebrate with a crowd, I mean the whole crowd was in the fucking ring with them doing the whole arm thing. So it was a cool sight. But that was Hardcore Heaven 1995. If I had to recommend it, I would say no. There's definitely better ECW pay-per-views out there, or better ECW shows, whatever you want to call this, a pseudo pay-per-view, to show someone who has never before seen ECW. This just really was not all that good. There was a large focus on Shane Douglas. So it was a newsworthy night for that. No titles changed hands or anything, but it was a newsworthy night for that. But the only good matches were the main event. I thought was great. It really capped off with the main event. And then also the ECW tag team title match. Everything else, especially like the tag value match or whatever the fuck you call it, the death match, was completely unnecessary. Hack Myers and Big Mally was terrible. Scorpio and Taz was good, but not as good as it could have been. So kind of a disappointing show. The crowd really was not as electric as you would imagine them to be, but hopefully future ECW pay-per-views are better. So that being said, like I said last week, going forward here on WrestleRant, last week we talked about Starrcade 1983. Today we talked about Hardcore Heaven 1995. Next week, I believe, unless my dates are off and I'm getting this wrong, we're talking a TNA pay-per-view from 2004. If I'm not mistaken, it's Victory Road 2004. I might be wrong about that, but it's going to take forever to do all of them. So what I'm going to be doing going forward is reviewing all the WCW, all the ECW, and the TNA pay-per-views at once, every week. So it's not like I'll be going through every WCW pay-per-view, because at that rate, we won't get any ECW reviews or any TNA reviews for years. It's going to take longer to get through every show at this point, but I'll be doing WrestleRant till I'm fucking 50 years old, I guess, in order to get through every pay-per-view on the network. And all the while, we will still be talking about all the WWE pay-per-views from a year ago and all the NXT TakeOver specials from a year ago. So it's going to be a busy time here on WrestleRant. Tomorrow, or rather next Tuesday, I should say, we kick off an all-new era, I guess, with WrestleRant and reviewing TNA pay-per-views for the very first time here on WrestleRant. So stay tuned for that. Following that, I believe, the Tuesday after that, we have my Clash of Champions 2016 review, and then another WCW pay-per-view. I think Starrcade 1984. So look forward to that. That's going to be some exciting stuff coming down the pike. But in the meantime, and in between time, guys, you can find me on the Twitter machine. Follow me there at WrestleRant. Find me on Facebook, like the Page. Give it the old thumbs up at facebook.com/graham.gsm.matthews. Be sure to like this video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. All your support is amazingly appreciated. Have a great rest of your week, folks. I'm Graham GSM Matthews. Stay hardcore, and I'll catch your ass down the road.